Hello there, and welcome to Psyche's Rest. Tonight, we're going to explore one of the most extraordinary capabilities of the human mind, the ability to change, to grow, to learn, to transform what is unfamiliar and difficult into something natural and effortless. Think about all the things you know how to do: walking, speaking, reading these words, maybe riding a bicycle, cooking a favorite meal, or playing a musical instrument. Each of these skills, no matter how automatic they feel now, was once completely foreign to you. Your brain didn't come pre-programmed with them. You had to learn, and learning, it turns out, is far more fascinating than simply storing information. It's a process that reshapes your brain, building new connections between neurons, strengthening some pathways while letting others fade. It's a dance between consciousness and automation, between effort and ease. And psychologists have spent more than a century mapping how it works, uncovering principles that explain everything from why a dog salivates at the sound of a bell to how a concert pianist's fingers find the right keys without conscious thought. Tonight, we'll wander through that landscape together. We'll explore the different ways learning happens, through association and consequence, through watching others, through deliberate, focused practice. We'll trace the stages a skill moves through as it develops and understand why learning sometimes feels rapid and thrilling and other times slow and frustrating. You might find yourself drifting as we explore these ideas, and that's perfectly fine. Let the concepts wash over you gently. There's no pressure to remember every detail, no test waiting at the end. Just the quiet pleasure of understanding a little more about how you became the person you are, and how you'll continue to grow and change for as long as you live. If you enjoy these nighttime journeys into the mind, you can subscribe below to join us for more. And if thoughts arise along the way, the comments are always open. But for now, just settle in. Let your body sink into comfort. Let your breathing slow and deepen. And let's begin. Before we explore the different ways we learn, it's worth pausing to appreciate something remarkable. Your brain is not fixed. It's not a static machine that simply runs the same programs your whole life. It's alive, dynamic, constantly reshaping itself in response to experience. Neuroscientists call this capacity neuroplasticity, and it's the foundation that makes all learning possible. For a long time, scientists believed the brain was mostly formed during childhood and remained largely unchanged in adulthood. The prevailing view was that you were born with a certain number of neurons, and once development was complete, the architecture was set. Learning might happen, but it was thought to involve existing structures rather than creating new ones. But research over the past few decades has revealed something very different. The brain is plastic, not in the sense of being made of synthetic material, but in the older sense of the word, meaning moldable, changeable, capable of being shaped. And this plasticity persists throughout your entire life. Every time you learn something, your brain physically changes. Neurons, the cells that transmit electrical and chemical signals, communicate with each other across tiny gaps called synapses. When you learn, the strength and number of these synaptic connections shift. Some grow stronger, making communication between those neurons more efficient. Others weaken or disappear entirely, a process just as important as growth, because it allows the brain to prioritize what matters and let go of what doesn't. This process is called synaptic plasticity, and it operates through mechanisms with names like long-term potentiation and long-term depression. Long-term potentiation, often abbreviated as LTP, is the strengthening of synapses based on recent patterns of activity. When two neurons fire together repeatedly, the connection between them becomes more robust. Neuroscientists sometimes summarize this with the phrase, cells that fire together, wire together. It's the brain's way of building and reinforcing pathways that support repeated behaviors and thoughts. Long-term depression, or LTD, works in the opposite direction. When synapses are not used, or when their activation patterns don't align with the overall network activity, those connections weaken. This pruning is essential. It prevents the brain from becoming cluttered with irrelevant or outdated information, and it sharpens the patterns that remain. Together, these processes allow your brain to encode experiences, consolidate memories, and refine skills. When you practice a new piece on the piano, the neurons involved in coordinating your finger movements begin to strengthen their connections. When you study a foreign language, the networks that process those sounds and meanings grow more defined. When you learn to recognize a friend's voice, the auditory and memory systems involved in that recognition become more tightly linked. And this isn't just happening in isolated patches of the brain. Learning often involves widespread changes across multiple regions, creating networks that link perception, action, emotion, and memory. The brain is a beautifully interconnected system, and learning is the process by which that system reorganizes itself to better navigate the world. Research has shown remarkable examples of this plasticity. London taxi drivers, who must memorize thousands of streets and routes, have been found to have enlarged hippocampi, the brain region involved in spatial navigation. Musicians who play string instruments show expanded representation of their left-hand fingers in the brain's motor cortex, the area that controls movement. People who learn to juggle show structural changes in brain regions involved in processing visual motion, changes that begin to reverse if they stop practicing. Each of these examples demonstrates the same principle. The brain physically reshapes itself to support the skills you use most. What's particularly striking is that neuroplasticity doesn't stop after childhood. It's true that young brains are extraordinarily plastic, which is why children learn languages and motor skills with seemingly effortless speed. But adults retain a powerful capacity for change. You can learn new languages, develop new skills, even recover function after brain injuries through the formation of new neural pathways. The process may be slower, may require more effort, but it's still very much possible. This has profound implications. It means you're never locked into the version of yourself that exists today. Your habits, your abilities, your patterns of thought, they're all written in neural connections that can be rewritten. It means that effort and practice aren't just about willpower or discipline. They're about biology, about physically shaping the organ that generates your experience of the world. And it also means that the act of learning is not separate from the act of being. You are, in a very real sense, the accumulated result of everything you've learned, the skills you've practiced, the environments you've navigated, the people you've observed. All of it has left traces in the architecture of your brain. And every new experience, every moment of attention, continues to sculpt that architecture, quietly, invisibly, beautifully. As you lie here in the dark, you can almost feel it, the soft hum of neurons adjusting their connections, the living tissue of thought reshaping itself even now, even in this moment of rest. It's happening whether you notice it or not, the brain doing what it does best, adapting, learning, becoming. One of the earliest and most fundamental forms of learning is something that happens largely outside your conscious awareness. It's called classical conditioning, and it was discovered, quite by accident, by a Russian physiologist named Ivan Pavlov at the turn of the 20th century. Pavlov wasn't studying psychology. He was studying digestion, particularly the salivary response in dogs. He'd set up a careful experimental arrangement where dogs were fed, and he measured how much they salivated in response to the food. It was meticulous, precise work, the kind that would eventually earn him a Nobel Prize. But then he noticed something odd. The dogs started salivating before the food arrived. They would salivate at the sound of footsteps in the hallway, or the sight of the lab assistant who usually brought their meal, or even the sound of a bell that happened to ring around feeding time. The salivation, which should have been a response to food in the mouth, was now being triggered by cues that merely predicted the food. Pavlov realized he was witnessing a new kind of learning, one where the brain forms associations between stimuli that occur together in time. And he designed experiments to study it systematically. The setup was elegant. He'd ring a bell, a neutral stimulus that initially had nothing to do with food or salivation. Then, shortly after, he'd present food, which naturally caused the dogs to salivate. After repeating this pairing many times, bell followed by food, something remarkable happened. The dogs began to salivate at the sound of the bell alone, even when no food appeared. The bell had become a conditioned stimulus, and the salivation in response to it was a conditioned response. The dogs had learned an association. Bell predicts food, and because food triggers salivation, the bell now did too. This might seem simple, even trivial, but it revealed something profound about how the nervous system works. The brain is constantly tracking patterns in the environment, looking for regularities, for cues that predict what's coming next. And when it finds those patterns, it adjusts behavior accordingly, often without any conscious reasoning or decision-making. Classical conditioning doesn't require thought. It doesn't require intention. It just happens as a natural consequence of the brain's wiring. And it happens in humans just as it does in dogs. Think about the feeling you get when you smell a particular perfume that someone you loved used to wear. The scent triggers a wave of emotion, maybe warmth, maybe sadness, maybe longing. You didn't decide to feel that way. The association formed automatically, linking the smell with the memories and emotions tied to that person. That's classical conditioning at work. Or consider the queasiness you might feel if you once got food poisoning from a particular dish. Even years later, the sight or smell of that food can make your stomach turn. Your brain learned the association. Food followed by illness, and now the food alone triggers a defensive response, even if logically you know it's probably safe. Classical conditioning also explains phobias, at least some of them. If a child is bitten by a dog, the pain and fear become associated with the sight and sound of dogs. Later, even friendly dogs might trigger anxiety. Because the brain has learned that dogs predict danger, the response is involuntary, deeply wired, resistant to logical reassurance. Pavlov also discovered several important principles about how these associations work. One is timing. For the association to form, the conditioned stimulus, the bell, needs to come just before the unconditioned stimulus, the food. If the bell rings long after the food is gone, or if the food appears first and then the bell rings, the association is much weaker or doesn't form at all. The brain is looking for predictive relationships, and timing matters. Another principle is extinction. If you ring the bell many times without ever presenting food again, the conditioned response gradually fades. The dog stops salivating at the bell because the association no longer holds. The brain unlearns what it once learned, adapting to the new pattern. But extinction doesn't mean the association is completely erased. After a period of rest, if you ring the bell again, the salivation often returns, at least partially, a phenomenon called spontaneous recovery. The original learning left a trace that can be reactivated even after it seemed to disappear. Pavlov also identified generalization and discrimination. Generalization means that stimuli similar to the conditioned stimulus can also trigger the response. If a dog learns to salivate to a bell of a certain pitch, it might also salivate, though perhaps less strongly, to bells of slightly different pitches. The brain generalizes from the specific to the similar. Discrimination is the opposite. With training, the brain can learn to respond only to the specific conditioned stimulus and not to similar ones. If food always follows one bell but never follows a different bell, the dog learns to salivate only to the first. The brain sharpens its predictions, becoming more precise. These principles, simple as they might sound, have enormous reach. Classical conditioning shapes emotional responses, physiological reactions, even aspects of immune function. It's part of why certain songs make you feel a certain way, why the smell of a hospital might make you tense, why a particular place can flood you with memories. It's learning at its most automatic, most fundamental level. A process that connects the world outside to the responses inside, stitching together patterns that help you navigate life, often without ever needing to think about it. And in the quiet of this moment, you can appreciate the elegance of it. The way your brain, without any conscious effort, has spent your entire life learning what predicts what, building a web of associations that colors your experience. You are, in part, a collection of these learned connections, threads woven so tightly into the fabric of your mind that you barely notice them. But they're there, shaping how you feel, how you react, how you move through the world. While classical conditioning explains how we learn associations between stimuli, it doesn't explain how we learn to do things, how we acquire behaviors. That's where another form of learning comes in, one that was championed by the psychologist B.F. Skinner. It's called operant conditioning, and it's based on a simple but powerful idea. Behavior is shaped by its consequences. Skinner was a radical behaviorist, meaning he believed that psychology should focus on observable behavior rather than internal mental states. He wasn't particularly interested in thoughts or feelings. He wanted to understand how behavior is controlled by the environment. And his work revealed that much of what we do is learned through a process of trial and error, guided by whether our actions lead to rewards or punishments. The term operant refers to behaviors that operate on the environment actions that produce some effect in the world. And Skinner showed that when a behavior is followed by a favorable outcome, that behavior becomes more likely to occur again. When it's followed by an unfavorable outcome, it becomes less likely. This might sound obvious, and in some ways it is. We all know that rewards encourage behavior and punishments discourage it. But Skinner's contribution was to study this systematically, to map out the principles with precision, and to show just how powerful and pervasive this kind of learning is. He invented a device called an operant conditioning chamber, often known as a Skinner box, to study how animals learn. A typical box might contain a lever and a food dispenser. A rat placed inside would wander around exploring. Eventually, by chance, it would press the lever, and when it did, food would appear. The rat would eat and then continue exploring. But over time, something shifted. The rat began to press the lever more often, more deliberately. It had learned the connection. Lever press produces food. The behavior had been reinforced. Reinforcement is anything that increases the likelihood of a behavior, and it comes in two forms. Positive reinforcement means adding something pleasant. The food is a positive reinforcer for the lever press. Negative reinforcement means removing something unpleasant. If the floor of the box delivered a mild shock, and pressing the lever stopped the shock, the rat would learn to press the lever. The behavior is reinforced, not by adding something good, but by taking away something bad. Punishment works in the opposite direction. It decreases the likelihood of a behavior. Positive punishment means adding something unpleasant, like a shock following a behavior. Negative punishment means removing something pleasant, like taking away a toy when a child misbehaves. Both make the behavior less likely to occur in the future. Skinner explored these principles in extraordinary detail, showing how subtle variations in timing and consistency could dramatically change learning. One key factor is the schedule of reinforcement, the pattern by which rewards are delivered. If you reinforce a behavior every single time it occurs, that's a continuous schedule. It leads to rapid learning, but also rapid extinction if the reinforcement stops. The rat quickly learns that lever presses produce food, but if the food stops coming, it also quickly stops pressing. But if you reinforce behavior only some of the time, that's a partial or intermittent schedule, and it creates behavior that's much more persistent. Skinner identified several types. In a fixed ratio schedule, reinforcement comes after a set number of responses. Press the lever 10 times, get food. This produces high rates of responding with brief pauses after each reinforcement. In a variable ratio schedule, reinforcement comes after an unpredictable number of responses, sometimes after 2 presses, sometimes after 20. This produces the highest, most consistent rates of responding, because the next press could always be the one that pays off. This is the principle behind slot machines and why they're so compelling. You never know when the next pull will win, so you keep pulling. In a fixed interval schedule, reinforcement is available after a certain amount of time has passed. The first response after, say, 1 minute produces food. This leads to a pattern where responding slows after reinforcement and picks up again as the interval nears its end. In a variable interval schedule, the time varies unpredictably, leading to steady, moderate responding. These patterns might seem abstract, but they're everywhere in real life. Your paycheck is usually a fixed interval reinforcement. Checking social media for new messages is often reinforced on a variable interval schedule. Sales commissions might follow a ratio schedule, and the particular schedule shapes how persistently and how often you engage in the behavior. Skinner also showed how complex behaviors could be built up gradually through a process called shaping. Instead of waiting for an animal to perform a complicated action all at once, you reinforce successive approximations, small steps toward the goal. Want to teach a pigeon to turn in a circle? Reinforce any slight turn of the head, then only reinforce turns that go a bit further. Gradually, you require more and more of a turn before delivering the reward. And eventually, the pigeon is spinning in full circles. The behavior is shaped, step by step, through selective reinforcement. This principle applies to human learning too. When a child is learning to speak, parents don't wait for perfect words. They reinforce approximations. The baby says ba, and the parent smiles and responds. Later, baba gets reinforced. Eventually, bottle emerges, shaped through countless small reinforcements. Operant conditioning also explains why bad habits can be so hard to break. If a behavior has been intermittently reinforced, especially on a variable schedule, it becomes remarkably resistant to extinction. You might rationally know that checking your phone constantly is a waste of time, but if it occasionally delivers something rewarding, a funny message, an interesting notification, that variable reinforcement keeps the behavior alive. The power of operant conditioning extends into nearly every corner of human behavior. In classrooms, teachers use it when they praise students for correct answers, reinforcing academic engagement. In workplaces, bonuses and promotions serve as reinforcers for productive work. In relationships, the attention and affection we give and receive shape how we interact with one another. Even the simple act of putting on a seatbelt is maintained by negative reinforcement, the removal of that annoying beeping sound. We are constantly being shaped by consequences, often so subtly that we never notice the learning taking place. And it explains how environments shape us, often in ways we don't notice. The behaviors that get reinforced in your life, by your job, your relationships, your surroundings, those are the behaviors that grow stronger. The ones that are ignored or punished fade away. Over time, you become someone shaped by the contingencies you've lived through, the patterns of consequence that have followed your actions. Skinner believed that much of what we call personality, choice, even free will, could be understood as the product of reinforcement histories. That's a provocative idea, and not everyone agrees with it. But there's no denying that operant conditioning is a powerful force, quietly sculpting behavior every day. In the soft darkness here, you might reflect on your own patterns, the habits you've built, the routines you follow, the things you do almost without thinking. How many of them were shaped by consequences, by rewards that followed certain actions and made them more likely to repeat? It's not the whole story of who you are, but it's part of it. A thread woven through the fabric of your behavior, subtle but persistent, connecting what you do to the world's response. There's a third major form of learning, one that doesn't require direct experience at all. You don't need to be conditioned or reinforced. You can learn simply by watching someone else. Psychologists call this observational learning, or sometimes social learning, and the researcher who brought it to prominence was Albert Bandura. Bandura believed that behaviorists like Skinner were missing something important. Yes, reinforcement shapes behavior, but humans and many animals also learn by observing others. A child doesn't need to touch a hot stove to learn it's dangerous. They can see a sibling get burned and learn from that. A young bird doesn't need to figure out how to crack seeds entirely on its own. It can watch its parents and imitate. This kind of learning is incredibly efficient. It allows knowledge to spread through a group without everyone having to go through trial and error individually. And it's deeply social, rooted in the ability to pay attention to others, remember what they did, and reproduce those actions. Bandura's most famous demonstration of observational learning is the Bobo doll experiment, conducted in the early 1960 seconds. In this study, young children watched an adult interact with a large inflatable doll called a Bobo doll. In one condition, the adult behaved aggressively, hitting the doll, shouting at it, throwing it around the room. In another condition, the adult played calmly and ignored the doll. Later, the children were allowed to play in a room with the Bobo doll. Those who had watched the aggressive model were significantly more likely to imitate that aggression, hitting and yelling at the doll in ways that closely mirrored what they'd seen. The children who had watched the calm model showed much less aggression. The experiment had profound implications. It showed that children could acquire new behaviors simply by watching, even without any direct reinforcement. And it raised important questions about the effects of media violence, questions that remain relevant today. If children learn aggression by watching a live model, what might they learn from watching violence on television or in video games? But observational learning isn't limited to negative behaviors. It's also how much of culture is transmitted. Children learn language largely by listening and imitating. They learn social norms, manners, even emotional responses by watching the people around them. Apprentices learn crafts by observing masters. Students learn teaching styles by watching their teachers. Much of what makes us human is passed down not through direct instruction, but through observation and imitation. Bandura identified several factors that influence whether observational learning occurs. First, you have to pay attention to the model. If you're distracted or uninterested, you won't encode what they're doing. Second, you have to retain the information. Remember what you observed so you can reproduce it later. Third, you need to be able to physically reproduce the behavior, to translate what you saw into action. And fourth, you need motivation. Even if you could imitate a behavior, you won't unless there's some reason to do so. Motivation can come from several sources. You might see the model being rewarded for the behavior, which Bandura called vicarious reinforcement. If you watch someone get praised for helping others, you're more likely to help others yourself. Or you might anticipate that performing the behavior will lead to rewards for you. Or the behavior might align with your values and self-concept, providing internal motivation. Bandura also emphasized that observational learning isn't passive imitation. It involves cognitive processes, attention, memory, decision-making. The learner is actively interpreting what they see, deciding what's important and constructing their own understanding. This was a significant departure from strict behaviorism, which tended to downplay internal mental states. Over time, Bandura expanded his theory into what he called social cognitive theory, which placed even more emphasis on the role of thought and self-regulation. He introduced the concept of self-efficacy, the belief in your own ability to succeed at a task. This belief, he showed, is shaped partly by watching others. If you see someone similar to you succeed at something, your own sense of efficacy for that task increases. If you see them fail, it decreases. Observational learning is woven into the fabric of everyday life. You learn how to behave in a new social situation by watching what others do. You learn new skills by watching tutorials or demonstrations. You absorb attitudes, values, and even prejudices from the people and media around you, often without realizing it. And this form of learning highlights something beautiful about being human. We're not isolated individuals, each figuring out the world from scratch. We're deeply social creatures, constantly learning from each other, building on the knowledge and skills of those who came before us. Every time you watch someone and learn, you're participating in a process that has allowed human culture to accumulate and evolve over thousands of generations. In the gentle quiet of this moment, you might think about the people you've learned from, the ones you watched and admired, whose actions shaped your own. Teachers, parents, friends, even strangers, whose example left a mark. You carry pieces of them with you, woven into your own patterns of behavior and thought. And in turn, someone else might be watching you, learning from your example, carrying forward the thread. It's a kind of invisible teaching, quiet and continuous, connecting us all in a web of shared learning. So far, we've talked about different forms of learning: associations, consequences, observation. But what happens when you're learning a specific skill, something like playing the piano, or speaking a new language, or hitting a tennis ball? Psychologists have found that skill acquisition tends to follow a predictable path, moving through distinct stages as the skill develops. The most influential model of this process was proposed by psychologists Paul Fitts and Michael Posner in 1967. They suggested that learning a motor skill involves 3 stages, which they called the cognitive stage, the associative stage, and the autonomous stage. And while they focused on motor skills, the framework applies more broadly to many kinds of learning. The first stage, the cognitive stage, is where you begin. Everything is new and unfamiliar. You're trying to understand what you're supposed to do, what the goal is, and what sequence of actions will get you there. This stage is intensely conscious and effortful. You have to think about every movement, every step. Imagine learning to drive a car for the first time. You're overwhelmed with information. Where are your hands supposed to go? How hard do you press the pedals? When do you check the mirrors? Every action requires deliberate attention. You might verbalize instructions to yourself. Okay, now put it in gear. Slowly release the clutch. Give it a little gas. Your performance is inconsistent and full of errors. Sometimes you stall. Sometimes you brake too hard. The cognitive load is enormous because you're relying on declarative knowledge, the what to do, without yet having the procedural knowledge, the how to do it smoothly. At this stage, progress can feel slow and frustrating. But it's also a time of rapid learning. Each attempt teaches you something new. Errors provide feedback, and your brain is busy encoding the task, building the initial neural pathways that will support the skill. Then, with practice, you move into the associative stage. This is where you start to refine the skill, smoothing out the rough edges, reducing errors, becoming more consistent. You're no longer just figuring out what to do, you're learning how to do it well. And you're starting to notice what works and what doesn't. The transition from cognitive to associative is gradual and often goes unnoticed. One day you realize that you're no longer thinking through every step, that some parts of the skill have started to flow more naturally. The conscious effort is still there, but it's less overwhelming. You have mental space to notice subtleties, to pay attention to feedback, to experiment with slight variations. This is when learning often feels most rewarding, because you can see yourself improving week by week, session by session. The skill is becoming yours, settling into your body and mind in ways that feel increasingly natural. The associative stage is characterized by less reliance on verbal instruction and more on feel and feedback. You're beginning to develop procedural knowledge, a kind of embodied understanding that doesn't need words. When driving, you stop thinking, press the clutch, shift, release, and start just doing it, attending to the smoothness of the transition rather than the individual steps. Your performance becomes more reliable. You make fewer glaring mistakes, though there are still inconsistencies, and you begin to detect your own errors and correct them. This stage often lasts much longer than the cognitive stage, because refinement takes time. You're adjusting, tuning, integrating feedback. The neural connections supporting the skill are being strengthened and reorganized, becoming more efficient. Finally, with extensive practice, you may reach the autonomous stage. This is where the skill becomes automatic, effortless, requiring little conscious attention. You can perform it while thinking about other things, or even while doing another task entirely. An experienced driver doesn't think about shifting gears or checking mirrors. They just drive, and their attention is free to focus on the conversation they're having or the route they're planning. A skilled musician doesn't think about where each finger goes. The music flows, and their conscious mind is free to focus on expression and interpretation. An expert typist doesn't think about which finger hits which key. The words appear on the screen as if by magic, translated directly from thought to text. At this stage, the skill is deeply embedded in procedural memory, and the neural pathways are highly efficient and automatic. In fact, trying to consciously control an automatic skill can sometimes disrupt it. A phenomenon experienced by athletes and musicians when they overthink during a performance. It's important to note that not every skill reaches the autonomous stage, and reaching it can take years, even decades. Many skills stabilize somewhere in the associative stage, good enough for their purpose, but not fully automatic. And that's okay. Not everything needs to become effortless. These stages also aren't entirely separate. There's overlap and gradual transition, and learning doesn't always proceed smoothly from one stage to the next. There are plateaus, periods where progress seems to stall, which we'll explore in a moment. But the framework is useful because it helps you understand where you are in the learning process and what kind of practice you need. In the cognitive stage, you need clear instruction, models to observe, and opportunities to try and fail safely. In the associative stage, you need lots of practice with feedback so you can refine and correct. In the autonomous stage, continued practice maintains the skill and can push it toward even higher levels of performance. Understanding these stages can also make learning less frustrating. When you're in the cognitive stage, struggling and making errors, you can remind yourself that this is normal, expected, part of the process. The struggle is how the brain learns. And when you're in the associative stage, working to refine a skill that still feels effortful, you can appreciate that this is where mastery is built, slowly and patiently. In the soft stillness here, you might reflect on the skills you've acquired over your life, the ones that once felt impossible and now feel easy. You've moved through these stages again and again, often without knowing it. And each time, your brain reshaped itself, building the pathways that turned effort into ease, turning conscious thought into fluid action. It's a kind of quiet miracle, happening over and over, as ordinary as breathing and as extraordinary as any transformation in nature. As you practice a skill, moving through the stages we just discussed, your progress doesn't usually follow a straight line. Psychologists often represent learning with something called a learning curve, a graph that plots performance on the vertical axis and time or practice on the horizontal axis. And the shape of that curve tells a story. At the beginning, when you're in the cognitive stage, the curve is often steep. Your performance improves rapidly because you're starting from zero, and even small amounts of practice lead to noticeable gains. The first few times you try to juggle, you drop the balls constantly. But within an hour, you might manage a few catches. Within a few days, you might keep them going for several seconds. The initial gains feel dramatic, but as you continue practicing, the curve begins to flatten. The rate of improvement slows. You're still getting better, but the changes are smaller, harder to notice. This is normal. Early learning is about acquiring the basic structure of the skill, and that happens relatively quickly. Later learning is about refinement, about shaving off small inefficiencies and errors, and that takes longer. Eventually, many learning curves level off into what looks like a plateau, a flat stretch where performance seems to stop improving despite continued practice. Plateaus can be deeply frustrating. You're putting in the effort, but the results aren't showing. It feels like you've hit a ceiling, like maybe you've reached the limit of your ability. But plateaus are often not what they seem. Sometimes they're periods of consolidation. Your brain is busy integrating what you've learned, reorganizing neural pathways, making them more efficient. The improvements are happening under the surface, and they'll become visible once the consolidation is complete. It's like the calm before a breakthrough. Other times, plateaus occur because you're practicing at a level that's now comfortable. You've reached what some call the OK plateau, a level of competence that's good enough for most purposes. And without deliberate effort to push beyond that comfort zone, you stay there. You can type at a certain speed, and it's fast enough for your needs, so you never try to get faster. You can play a few songs on the guitar well enough to enjoy, and you stop progressing because the motivation to improve further isn't there. There's nothing wrong with staying on a plateau if the skill serves its purpose. Not everything needs to be mastered, but if you do want to continue improving, you need to change something. Maybe you need to increase the difficulty, to tackle challenges that are just beyond your current ability. Maybe you need to get feedback so you can identify specific weaknesses to work on. Maybe you need to vary your practice to prevent it from becoming too automatic and mindless. Psychologist Joshua Foer, in his book Moonwalking with Einstein, explores this idea in the context of memory. He points out that most of us reach a plateau in everyday memory tasks, remembering where we parked, recalling names, and we stay there because it's sufficient. But memory champions, people who can memorize decks of cards or long strings of numbers, push past that plateau through deliberate, effortful practice using specific techniques. They don't have fundamentally different brains. They've just refused to settle on the plateau. Plateaus can also be caused by psychological factors. Self-doubt, fear of failure, or a fixed mindset, the belief that your abilities are set and can't change, can all create barriers to further progress. If you believe you've reached your limit, you might stop trying as hard, and that belief becomes self-fulfilling. Breaking through a plateau often requires a combination of persistence, strategic practice, and patience. You have to trust that the effort is still worthwhile even when the results aren't immediately visible. And sometimes stepping back, taking a break, can help. Rest allows the brain to consolidate learning, and when you return to the skill, you might find that the plateau has lifted. It's also worth recognizing that learning isn't just about the destination, reaching some perfect level of performance. It's also about the journey, the process of engagement, the satisfaction of working towards something. A plateau doesn't mean you're failing. It just means you're in a different phase of the journey. And over the course of a lifetime, you'll encounter many plateaus. Some you'll push through, others you'll accept, content with the level you've reached. Both choices are valid. The key is to understand what's happening, to see the plateau not as a wall but as a temporary landscape, and to decide for yourself whether to keep climbing or to rest and appreciate the view. In the quiet of this moment, lying here in the dark, you can let go of the pressure to always be improving. Progress isn't linear. Learning isn't a race. And sometimes the most important thing is simply to keep showing up, to keep practicing, to keep engaging, trusting that the effort itself is reshaping you in ways you can't always see. If you want to move past a plateau, or if you simply want to acquire a skill at the highest level, there's a particular kind of practice that research suggests is essential. It's called deliberate practice, and it was studied extensively by psychologist Anders Ericsson, whose work revealed both what it takes to become an expert and how widely misunderstood that process often is. You've probably heard of the 10,000-hour rule, the idea that it takes roughly 10,000 hours of practice to become an expert in any field. This notion became popular through Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers, where he drew on Ericsson's research to suggest that time invested is the key to mastery. But Ericsson himself was quick to point out that the 10,000-hour rule is a misinterpretation of his findings. It's not just about time, it's about how you spend that time. Not all practice is created equal. You can spend 10,000 hours doing something and still be mediocre if that practice isn't structured correctly. What matters is deliberate practice, and it's a very specific thing. Deliberate practice is effortful, focused work aimed at improving performance. It's not the same as simply repeating a task or playing for fun. It has several key characteristics. First, deliberate practice is designed to address specific weaknesses. You don't just practice what you're already good at. You identify the aspects of the skill that need improvement and focus on those even though it's uncomfortable. A pianist might spend an entire session working on the difficult passage they keep stumbling over, rather than playing through the easy pieces they already know. Second, it requires full concentration and effort. You can't do deliberate practice while distracted or half asleep. It demands your complete attention, which is why it's mentally exhausting and can only be sustained for limited periods, usually a few hours a day at most. Third, it involves immediate feedback. You need to know whether what you're doing is correct, so you can adjust. This often requires a coach or teacher who can observe and provide guidance, or it might come from the task itself, like a chess player analyzing their games to see where they went wrong. Fourth, deliberate practice is not inherently enjoyable. Erickson and his colleagues emphasize this point. While the outcomes of practice, the sense of improvement, the performances, the achievements might be deeply satisfying, the practice itself is often hard, frustrating, and demanding. It requires pushing beyond your comfort zone, and that's not fun. This is why deliberate practice requires strong motivation. Without a clear goal and a deep commitment, most people won't sustain it. Erickson studied violinists at an elite music academy and found that the best performers, those on track for international solo careers, had accumulated an average of about 10,000 hours of solitary, deliberate practice by age 20. But crucially, they weren't just playing music for 10,000 hours, they were engaging in focused, effortful practice aimed at improvement. And even then, at 10,000 hours and age 20, they were nowhere near finished. They still had years of development ahead. The research also showed that the amount of deliberate practice, not innate talent alone, was the strongest predictor of skill level. This doesn't mean talent is irrelevant. People vary in their starting points and in how quickly they progress. But talent, whatever that means, is not sufficient. Without the hard work of deliberate practice, potential remains unrealized. Erickson's findings have been applied across many domains in chess, medicine, sports, music, writing. Expertise is built through thousands of hours of focused, challenging practice with feedback, and in every field, the pattern is similar. Experts don't just do more, they practice differently. They're constantly working at the edge of their ability, tackling problems that are just beyond their current skill level, and they seek out feedback to guide their improvement. For most of us, we're not trying to become world-class experts, but the principles of deliberate practice still apply if we want to get better at something. It means we can't just go through the motions. We have to practice with intention, focusing on weaknesses, seeking feedback, and pushing ourselves beyond what's comfortable. It also means we should be patient. Expertise takes time, usually years, and there are no shortcuts. The 10,000 hours, whether it's precisely that number or more or less, represent a long journey. And the journey requires not just time, but effort, focus, and often the guidance of someone who's already traveled that path. There's something humbling and empowering in this. Humbling because it means there's no magic, no secret trick that will make mastery easy. Empowering because it means that with the right kind of practice, sustained over time, improvement is possible. You're not limited by some fixed level of talent. You can grow. In the stillness of this moment, you might think about the skills you've worked hard to develop, the hours you've put in, the frustrations you've pushed through, the small victories along the way. That effort wasn't wasted. It was the process by which your brain built the pathways of competence. And if there's something you want to learn now or improve, you know what it takes. Not just time, but deliberate, focused practice. The willingness to struggle, to fail, to try again, and the patience to let the hours accumulate, trusting that they're shaping you slowly and surely into someone more capable than you were before. One of the most important discoveries in the science of learning is also one of the most counterintuitive. The best way to remember something is not to study it over and over in one long session. It's to space out your practice over time, allowing gaps between study sessions. Psychologists call this the spacing effect, and it's one of the most robust findings in all of cognitive science. The story begins with Hermann Ebbinghaus, a German psychologist working in the late 1800s. Ebbinghaus was interested in memory, and he wanted to study it scientifically. So he created lists of nonsense syllables, meaningless combinations of letters like Zuck or Dax, to eliminate the influence of prior knowledge. Then he memorized them, testing himself repeatedly to see how much he could recall over time. What he discovered was the forgetting curve, a graph showing how quickly newly learned information is forgotten. The curve is steep at first. Within the first 20 minutes, a significant portion of what you've just learned begins to fade. Within a day, even more is gone, but then the curve levels off and forgetting slows. What remains after a few days tends to stick around longer. But Ebbinghaus also found something encouraging. If you review the material before it's completely forgotten, the forgetting curve flattens. And if you review it again later, it flattens even more. Each time you retrieve the information, you strengthen the memory, making it more durable, more resistant to forgetting. And crucially, spacing those reviews out over time, rather than massing them together, produces much stronger, longer-lasting memories. This is the spacing effect. Reviewing material today, then again in a few days, then again in a week, leads to better retention than reviewing it 3 times in a single day. Why does spacing work? Part of the answer seems to involve the way memory is consolidated. When you first learn something, the memory is fragile, stored temporarily. Consolidation is the process by which that memory becomes stabilized, integrated into long-term storage. And consolidation takes time, often involving sleep, during which the brain replays and reorganizes information. Spacing allows each learning session to be followed by consolidation. The memory is strengthened, then allowed to rest, then strengthened again. Massed practice, cramming, doesn't give the brain time to consolidate between sessions, so the benefits are much smaller. Another part of the explanation involves retrieval. When you space your practice, each time you come back to the material, you have to work a bit harder to recall it because some forgetting has occurred. That effortful retrieval strengthens the memory more than easy retrieval. It's like exercising a muscle. The harder the work within reason, the stronger the result. This has profound implications for how we should study and learn. Cramming, the all-night study session before an exam, might help you pass the test the next day, but the information won't stick. A week later, most of it will be gone. If you want to truly learn something, to retain it for the long term, you need to spread your study out, revisiting the material multiple times over days and weeks. Spaced repetition systems, like flashcard apps that schedule reviews based on how well you know each item, are built on this principle. Items you struggle with are shown more frequently. Items you know well are spaced out further. The system optimizes the spacing to maximize retention with minimal study time. The spacing effect also applies beyond rote memorization. It works for skills, for problem solving, for understanding concepts. Practicing a musical piece multiple times in one day is less effective than practicing it once a day for several days. Working through math problems spaced across a week leads to better understanding than working through them all in one sitting. And interestingly, the benefits of spacing often aren't obvious to learners themselves. Massed practice can feel more effective because you're immersed in the material, and your performance during that session might be quite good. Space practice can feel harder because each time you come back, you've forgotten some and you have to work to recall. But that difficulty is deceiving. It's a sign that your brain is working hard, and that work is what builds durable memory. There's also something called the testing effect, closely related to spacing. Actively retrieving information, testing yourself, is more effective for learning than passively reviewing. When you quiz yourself, you're not just checking what you know. You're strengthening the memory through the act of retrieval, and combining testing with spacing, quizzing yourself repeatedly over time, is one of the most powerful learning strategies known. For all the complexity of learning, spaced repetition is beautifully simple. Review the material. Wait, review it again. Wait a bit longer, review again. Each cycle strengthens the memory, and the spacing ensures that the strengthening lasts. In the gentle dark of this moment, you might consider how this applies to your own life. The things you want to remember, the skills you want to maintain, they need revisiting. Not constantly, but periodically. A little bit of practice or review, spaced out over time, can keep knowledge and skills alive in ways that bursts of intense effort cannot. It's a reminder that learning is not a single event, but a process that unfolds over time. And patience, the willingness to return again and again, is as important as any other ingredient. One of the ultimate goals of learning is not just to know something or to be able to do something in one specific context, but to apply that knowledge or skill in new situations. Psychologists call this transfer of learning, and it's both the promise and the challenge of education. Transfer happens when what you've learned in one situation helps you in another. You learn arithmetic in school and you use it to calculate a tip at a restaurant. You learn to drive one car and you can drive a different car. You learn to solve a particular type of problem and you can solve similar problems you've never seen before. But transfer is not automatic, and research shows that it's much harder to achieve than we often assume, especially when the new situation is different from the original learning context. Psychologists distinguish between two types of transfer. Near transfer refers to applying learning in situations that are very similar to the original. If you learn to multiply two-digit numbers and then are asked to multiply different two-digit numbers, that's near transfer. The context and structure are almost identical. Far transfer refers to applying learning in situations that are quite different. If you learn logic through studying mathematics and then apply logical reasoning to analyze an argument in philosophy or law, that's far transfer. The surface features are different, even though the underlying skill is related. Near transfer is relatively common. Our brains are good at recognizing similar situations and applying known solutions. But far transfer is much rarer and much more difficult. Just because you've learned something in one context doesn't mean you'll spontaneously recognize that it applies elsewhere. One reason transfer is hard is that much of what we learn is tied to the context in which we learned it. The specific examples, the particular setting, the way the information was presented, all of that gets encoded along with the knowledge itself. And when you encounter a new situation that looks different, your brain might not make the connection. There's a classic study that illustrates this. Researchers taught students a principle about problem solving using one type of story, a military problem. Later, they presented a different problem, a medical scenario that could be solved using the same principle. Very few students spontaneously applied what they'd learned. But when the researchers explicitly told them that the earlier lesson might be relevant, transfer improved dramatically. The knowledge was there, but they didn't recognize that it applied. This suggests that transfer often requires a level of abstraction. You have to see past the surface details to the underlying structure or principle. And that's a skill in itself, one that can be cultivated through teaching, that emphasizes general principles and encourages students to look for connections across contexts. Varied practice also helps with transfer. If you learn a concept using multiple examples from different contexts, you're more likely to extract the general principle and apply it broadly. If you only see one example, your understanding remains tied to that specific case. Some researchers have also explored whether certain types of training, like learning chess or studying Latin, might produce broad cognitive benefits that transfer to unrelated domains. The idea is appealing. Learn to think logically in one area, and maybe you'll think more logically in general. But the evidence for such far transfer is mixed at best. While some studies have found modest benefits, many have not, and the overall picture suggests that transfer is usually limited. Learning chess makes you better at chess, not necessarily better at math or critical thinking in general. The skills you develop tend to be domain-specific. This doesn't mean education is pointless, only that we should be realistic about what transfers and what doesn't. The goal shouldn't necessarily be to find magical subjects that boost intelligence across the board. Instead, it should be to teach the specific knowledge and skills that are valuable, and to teach them in ways that maximize the chances they'll be recognized and applied when relevant. One promising approach is to teach metacognitive skills, the ability to reflect on your own thinking, to recognize when a strategy or piece of knowledge might be useful, and to actively look for connections. If you develop the habit of asking yourself, "Have I seen something like this before? What do I know that might help here?" you're more likely to notice opportunities for transfer. Transfer is also more likely when learning is deep rather than superficial. If you've truly understood a principle, if you can explain why it works and when it applies, you're better equipped to recognize new situations where it's relevant. Rote memorization, on the other hand, produces knowledge that's fragile and context-bound. In the soft stillness here, you might think about the knowledge you carry and where it applies. How often do you recognize that something you learned in one part of your life could help in another? Transfer is a kind of creative act, seeing connections that aren't immediately obvious, and it's a skill you can nurture. The more you practice looking for those connections, the more you'll find them, and the richer and more useful your learning becomes. We've traveled through a landscape of ideas tonight, exploring the many ways learning happens and how skills develop. From the automatic associations of classical conditioning to the deliberate effort of skill refinement. From watching and imitating others to spacing out practice over time. Each piece reveals a different facet of how the brain changes, how experience shapes us, how we grow from what we don't know into what we do. And now, as we bring these threads together, a broader picture emerges. Learning is not one thing. It's a collection of processes, each suited to different kinds of knowledge and different situations. Sometimes you learn without awareness, through association and reinforcement. Sometimes you learn by watching, absorbing patterns from the world around you. And sometimes you learn through conscious, effortful practice, pushing yourself toward mastery, one deliberate step at a time. The brain is capable of all of it, shifting between these modes fluidly, often using several at once. And that flexibility is part of what makes human learning so powerful. You're not stuck with one strategy or one path. You can adapt, finding the approach that fits the task. But certain themes recur across all these forms of learning. One is repetition. Whether it's the repeated pairing of a bell and food, or the thousands of hours of deliberate practice, or the spaced reviews that strengthen memory, learning requires coming back to something again and again. Each repetition strengthens the neural pathways, making the knowledge or skill more durable, more automatic, more yours. Another theme is feedback. Learning is a process of trial and error, of trying something, seeing the result, and adjusting. Classical and operant conditioning are built on feedback. Observational learning works better when you can see the consequences of others' actions. Deliberate practice requires knowing what you're doing wrong so you can fix it. Feedback is how the brain calibrates, how it moves from inaccuracy toward precision. A third theme is challenge. Growth happens at the edge of your ability, in the space between what you can already do and what you can't quite do yet. If something is too easy, you're not learning. You're just repeating. If it's too hard, you're overwhelmed. And progress stalls. The sweet spot is just beyond your current level. Difficult enough to stretch you, but not so difficult that you can't make progress. This is where neuroplasticity is most active, where new connections are forming and old ones are being refined. And perhaps the most important theme is patience. Learning takes time. Skills develop through stages, each requiring its own kind of work. Plateaus are normal. Forgetting is part of the process. And expertise, if that's the goal, requires years. There are no shortcuts, no magic pills, no overnight transformations. Just the steady accumulation of practice and experience, shaping the brain bit by bit. But within that patience, there's also hope. Because if learning takes time, it also means that you can learn. No matter where you are now, no matter what skills you lack or knowledge you wish you had, your brain retains the capacity to change. Neuroplasticity doesn't stop. You can start learning something new today, and with time and effort, you can become competent, even skilled. The path is open, and it's worth remembering that learning isn't only about achievement or performance. It's also about the richness of experience, the satisfaction of engaging with something deeply, the joy of seeing yourself grow. Even if you never reach the autonomous stage, even if you plateau and stay there, the process itself has value. It keeps your mind active, flexible, engaged with the world. As you lie here in the quiet dark, you can reflect on all the learning you've done over the course of your life. The skills that now feel effortless were once impossible. The knowledge that seems obvious was once completely foreign. And all of it happened through the mechanisms we've explored tonight. Your brain responding to experience, reshaping itself, building you into who you are. And that process continues. Tomorrow, you'll learn something new, even if it's small. You'll practice something, even if you don't call it that. You'll watch someone absorb a pattern, adjust a behavior. The learning never truly stops. It's woven into the fabric of being alive. So if there's something you want to learn, something you've been hesitant to try, maybe this is a gentle encouragement. Start small. Be patient with yourself. Expect the cognitive stage, the fumbling and errors. Embrace the repetition, the spacing, the deliberate effort. Seek feedback. Push just beyond your comfort zone. And trust that, over time, the brain will do what it does best. It will adapt. It will learn. It will change. You are, in a very real sense, always becoming. And learning is the process by which that becoming unfolds. As the night deepens and these ideas begin to blur at the edges, let yourself settle into a different kind of knowing. Not the effortful, cognitive kind, but the quiet knowing of rest. Your mind has done enough for today. It has learned, processed, navigated the world. And now it can be still. Learning will be there tomorrow. The skills you're building, the knowledge you're accumulating, the slow reshaping of your brain, all of it will continue. But for now, there's nothing you need to practice, nothing you need to improve, just the gentle permission to let go. If you've enjoyed this exploration and you'd like to join us for more nighttime journeys into the mind, feel free to subscribe. And if thoughts or reflections have surfaced, the comments are always open. But truly, there's no need to do anything at all. Just let your breathing slow. Let the weight of the day dissolve. Let the mechanisms of learning we've explored tonight continue their quiet work beneath the surface, consolidating, organizing, integrating. Your brain is taking care of it, even as you drift. And if sleep finds you, let it. If you're still awake, that's fine too. There's no pressure, no expectation, just the soft invitation to rest, to be, to let yourself simply exist in this moment without needing to know or do or become anything. The learning will take care of itself. The growth will happen in its own time. And you, right now, in this quiet space, are exactly where you need to be. Thank you for being here. Sleep well, and good night.